Of all the things that haunt the deep woods of the American South, the ghosts of forgotten battles, the murmurs of buried secrets, none are so hungry, so relentless, as the ones that walk on two legs. This is not a story about a single encounter, a fleeting shadow in the night. It is the history of a war, passed down through generations like a cursed inheritance, a conflict fought in the blood-soaked soil of Mississippi, where one family's stand against an ancient evil bled into another's desperate fight for survival. It's a story that asks a terrifying question. What happens when the thing that hunts you has been at war long before you were ever born? For years, the Lockett farm was an island of tranquility in Lafayette County, Mississippi. Edward Lockett Sr. and his wife, Virginia, had built their sprawling homestead through generations of toil and tenacity. Life was dictated by the seasons. Edward Sr.'s son, Edward Jr., raised his own boy on that farm after his wife, Elizabeth, died in childbirth. The boys' days were a cycle of chores on their 5-acre clearing, a rectangle carved from the wilderness. The family home stood at the southeast corner, and behind it, a cornfield stretched north, stopping just 75 feet from the unexplored wood line. To the west stood the barn, hog pens, and coops. Further west, a long, silent ridgeline ran the length of the clearing. That peace was shattered in 1948. Edward Sr., needing cash, signed a lucrative deal to supply oak and hickory to the Henderson & Sons sawmill in nearby Water Valley. The property was suddenly teeming with life. Logging trucks carved ruts into the earth, their engines howling through every daylight hour. The old dirt road was widened to a 12-foot gauge, and a new artery was cut 7 miles deep into the woods, pushing back the Lockett frontier. A few weeks in, the Oxford Eagle of July 9th ran a tiny item on mass hog killings south of Taylor, but no one connected it to the Locketts. One afternoon, Edward Jr. took his son for a drive down this new logging road. They entered a cathedral of immense oak trees, their limbs twisted like arthritic fingers, draped in heavy curtains of moss. The air grew heavy and still. Edward Jr.'s knuckles turned white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the trees like a trapped animal seeking escape. When his son started to climb a low-hanging oak limb, Edward Jr.'s voice cracked.
"Get back in the truck! Now!"
Something was not right. The following week, a foreman named Mr. David began full-scale operations. He was a 6'9" slab of pragmatism who had no time for superstition. While the loggers worked, Edward Sr. and his best friend, Barnabas, hunted deep within the woods. Far beyond the cacophony of the crew, they stumbled upon a clearing containing several severed deer heads. One had been impaled on a sharpened stick, a gruesome totem facing west toward the burial mounds at Bynum. Barnabas kept glancing over his shoulder, his rifle swinging toward every rustling leaf, sweat beading despite the cool air. The loggers soon began reporting their own unnerving experiences, fast-moving, ghost shapes threading the timberline, following them as they left for the day. The men, hardened by a dangerous trade, began packing up long before sunset, their fear overriding Mr. David's demands. One Tuesday evening, their terror took concrete form. A pickup truck came barreling down the road, its occupants spilling out, their faces ashen. One of their men was gone.
"I heard a grunt, and he vanished in thin air,"
one stammered. All that remained was his torn, bloodied shirt. That night, after a fruitless search, the unspoken secret hung heavy in the air until 4:30 a.m., when the family's 4 large German Shepherd Collie mixes erupted in a frenzy. In the living room, the men were already awake, weapons in hand. They had shot a large, unidentified animal in the woods, and its pack had followed them home. The boy and his grandmother, Virginia, were rushed to the attic as the dogs were brought inside. Below, the animals ran from room to room, barking and growling. Then, a new sound pierced the chaos, a growl so deep and powerful it vibrated through the floorboards. Virginia crept to the attic window and peered out into the darkness. The glass fogged from her breath, but she never spoke of what she saw. The silent scream on her face was more telling than any words. The boy stuffed his fist in his mouth to keep from screaming. Later, when the men huddled around the kitchen table planning their defense, Virginia finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she poured coffee.
"There were dozens of them,
She said quietly.
moving like they had purpose, like they were arranging themselves.
She set the pot down carefully.
Edward, this isn't random. They're not just hungry animals. They're conducting a siege.
Edward Sr. looked up from his rifle.
What do you mean, woman?
I mean, they're thinking.
Virginia continued, her schoolteacher's mind working through the evidence.
The way they positioned themselves around the property. The timing of their attacks. They want us to know they're there.
Her voice dropped to a whisper.
They're showing us we're trapped.
A stillness settled over the kitchen. One heartbeat, maybe two. And then the house was struck by a powerful blow, as if by a battering ram. Gunfire exploded into the night, answered by monstrous howls that eventually silenced the dogs. The next morning, a hog from the pen had been pulverized against the side of the house. A gray figure had dragged the ruined carcass to the back porch, tapped its chest twice with a claw the size of a railroad spike, and melted into the night. Barnabas shuddered. Some kind of reckoning, he thought. But for what? A posse ventured into the woods, finding giant nest-like structures and, deeper still, what appeared to be a burial mound. Mr. David, the 6'9" slab of pragmatism, took one look at the earthwork and backed away, his face pale as ash.
We're leaving. Now.
He hurried the group back. Only then did someone mention that the ridge faced Owl Creek's ceremonial mounds across the county line in Calhoun, though no one thought to mention it until pigs started screaming at night. That night, 10 men stood guard in the barn. As Edward Jr. stepped onto the back porch, his son opened the door and froze. The copper-sweet reek of wet fur and butcher shop blood hit them first. A barnyard blood odor nothing like the wet cedar and bile scent of the giants. Then they saw it standing in the cornfield, a 10-foot-tall, gray-furred figure. When their dog Charlie charged out, the creature turned. Its eyes shone with a sickening amber glow. It revealed a giant wolf's head with a thick, long snout marked by a fresh scar on its nostril, as if it had recently torn free from a coil of heavy barn wire. It dropped to all fours with a sound like a human joint crackling, magnified 100 times. Edward Jr. fired his shotgun as he slammed the door. They heard Charlie's yelp of agony, then a heavy thud. The night became a siege of screams, gunfire, and the sound of giant creatures walking on the roof. Barnabas counted 12. The loggers did not return. A new crew fled after a freshly killed deer was dropped through the roof of their barn. A party of 8 professional big-game hunters went into the woods. Only one returned at 5 a.m., stumbling and babbling about eyes like amber headlights and claws that could peel a man like an orange. He kept drawing wolf heads in the dirt with a shaking finger over and over until they had to restrain him. Barnabas shook his head grimly.
Even Mr. David wouldn't come back for his pay after this.
The farm was lost. The barn was set ablaze. Edward Sr. finally abandoned the property when he saw him from a distance. The gray one, standing on the ridgeline with 10 of his wolfmen, looking down on the farm as if they owned it. As they drove away, the boy saw a freshly carved symbol on the barn door, a single stark glyph. No. The sign for wolf, one Edward Sr. recognized from an old Chickasaw map Barnabas had shown him. But Edward Sr. vowed he would kill the gray one. He sold off 100 acres and used the funds to wage a war. He hired a blacksmith to forge massive traps, like those in a 1950 Popular Mechanics article, but bigger, welding railroad spikes into 12-inch jaws that curled and interlocked. The farmhouse was reinforced. Barnabas, meanwhile, was tasked with research. In a dusty corner of the county library, he discovered an 1870 Chickasaw booklet, its pages brittle as autumn leaves. 3 ancient night hunts were described in fading ink. The Skinning Ogre, where one of the Lofa flays a wolf that trespassed on sacred ground. The Wolf Clan's Vow, warriors pledging to guard burial mounds against the giants. The Tall One's Pact, a lone Lofa sparing a Chickasaw boy who showed proper respect at a boundary stone. A marginal note in cramped handwriting caught his eye. Lofa Ixo Flayer in the old tongue. Below that, in different ink, someone had scrawled a proverb, Isish Anok Fili, blood remembers. He found an elderly Chickasaw man named Joseph Crow Feather living near Pontotoc, who agreed to speak only once. The old man did not offer mysticism, only a stark, weary warning.
You are not the first,
He said, his voice dry as dust.
Your family bought land, but you did not buy the history.
That land was the heart of the Neshoba Iksa, the wolf people. They did not hunt the wolf, they respected it. But there is another kind, an older kind. The stories say they fought a war with the Lofa, The tall ones, long before our people came. It is a feud between monsters, and your farm is their battlefield. Both kinds know the old law. Blood debts are paid in blood, eye for eye, child for child. In our oldest tongue we say Lofa at Ishkina, the flayer wakes, when the wolf clan weakens. In our tongue, we have a tale, Shokatayat Nashoba, where the trickster fools the wolf. But these creatures cannot be tricked. You disturb something that should have been left buried. You cut a road into their house. Now they will say, Nashobasaya, I am a wolf. It was both battle cry and treaty term. What the wolf clan once shouted at Lofa to claim disputed ground. And they will show you what that means. The final battle was at hand. News of an Oklahoma farmhouse siege circulated in hunting circles that year, the siege of Honobia, and the men discussed whether to use a hog as bait or set up overlapping fields of fire. Before the siege, the men took stock. In the fortified house, their hope was measured in ammunition. 40 rounds of 30-06 12 gauge slugs, 3 boxes of 45. Edward Jr. tallied on a notepad. Edward Sr. checked his rifle one last time, his movements efficient and practiced.
Listen up.
He barked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen combat.
Whatever's out there, we hold this ground. No running, no panic. We shoot straight and we shoot to kill.
He looked each man in the eye.
Any man breaks, gets the rest of us killed.
Barnabas, ever the scholar even in crisis, adjusted his spectacles and spoke quietly. The research suggests these creatures demonstrate tactical intelligence.
They may attempt psychological warfare before direct assault.
His formal speech pattern contrasted sharply with the old soldier's bluntness.
English, Doc.
Edward Sr. grunted.
You mean they're gonna try to scare us before they kill us?
Precisely.
They chose to bunker down. The wolfmen returned. As the men finished their preparations, Barnabas, digging a gun position near the foundation, struck something solid. A rotted cedar post emerged from the earth, carved with a symbol that made Edward Sr.'s blood run cold. A half-wolf, half-giant figure locked in eternal struggle. He realized the post had once marked a boundary between wolf people and tall ones, and their farm sat squarely in the middle of what had been contested ground. Barnabas tied a strip of white buckskin to Edward Sr.'s rifle, murmuring that Chickasaw wolf warriors believed the color blinded Lofa at night. They began digging under the house while the gray one acted as a living battering ram. The house groaned, plaster cracking. Looking out the window, Edward Sr. made eye contact with the gray one, raised his rifle, and the beast, in a shocking display of intelligence, leaped 40 feet back. Barnabas discovered shooting them in the eyes caused immense pain. Refocused, Edward Sr., a deadeye with a rifle, began a grim duel with the gray one. Each time the beast charged, a bullet would find its mark, wounding and repelling. He severed the top of its ear, turning its strategic assault into a frenzied rage. 2 slugs and a single 45 round left beating in the chamber. Barnabas whispered, his voice cracking. The battle raged until sunrise, when the last shells were spent and the wolfmen vanished. The men had survived, but the farm was lost. Edward Lockett Sr. accepted defeat, abandoning their home to the shadows, but he swore he would return to finish what they'd started. The war didn't end. It just changed hands. Decades later, in those same haunted woods, a boy who would grow up to be called Luke spent his childhood with no other children nearby. His grandmother had been born a Lockett, carrying the bloodline and the burden of that ancient war. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, her weathered hands folding and refolding the same handkerchief while she stared into the tree line.
Some depths follow blood.
She would murmur when she thought no one was listening.
Some promises get passed down whether you want them or not.
When young Luke asked what she meant, she would only shake her head and pull him closer.
Just remember, child, when the woods feel wrong, they are wrong. Trust that feeling.
His days were defined by the woods and the river, where he forged an unlikely friendship with one of the Lofa, a massive Bigfoot-like creature he named Big Red for his immense size and the deep burgundy hue of his fur. Luke's most vivid memory was the day he found Big Red's handprint in the river mud, larger than a dinner plate, and traced each finger with his own small hand. For the majority of his young life, Big Red was his closest companion. Luke's family had been locked in the same quiet war for 5 generations, against creatures they knew as the Walking Wolves. That peace was shattered when Luke, then 21, went looking for his friend in the woods. A deep sense of unease settled over him when he couldn't find Big Red. As he turned to head home, 4 walking wolves emerged from the brush surrounding him. Just as they closed in, a thunderous crashing echoed through the forest as Big Red bulldozed his way to the scene. The giant woodsman shoved Luke, roaring for him to run, before intercepting one of the wolves. Luke made it home, but the terror had just begun. His grandfather went out to handle the threat. A week later, he was found dead in his shed. Years passed. One day, Luke and his father discovered a den hollowed out of the earth, its entrance nearly 4 feet wide. Peering in, Luke could hear the rhythmic breathing of something massive sleeping inside. When the wind shifted, carrying his scent into the dark opening, a low growl answered.
We effed up.
His father muttered. A few nights later, an unshakable sense of dread led Luke to send his family away. Around 11 p.m., he was jolted awake by a primal instinct. He opened his eyes and saw it standing in his room, just feet from his bed. The iron tang of slaughterhouse air filled his nostrils. As tears of terror streamed down his face, he lunged for his .45. The creature was faster, grabbing him by the shoulder and ramming him into the wall. As it picked the bathroom lock with its claws, his father charged up the stairs, guns blazing. The creature fled. The escalating activity drew more attention. One day, Luke saw a jet-black walking wolf stalking a man. He shouted a warning, and the enraged creature charged him instead. The man panicked, firing a handgun and hitting both of them. Luke's world dissolved into white noise and copper taste. The coma was a fog of antiseptic and murmurs, punctuated by dreams where Big Red stood at the foot of his hospital bed, shaking his massive head sadly. Fluorescent tubes quivered overhead like dying insects. A clipboard labeled "Fugitive Memory" floated in and out of vision, attached to a doctor who kept asking the same questions.
Do you remember what attacked you? Do you remember where?
Luke's tongue felt thick as leather. He couldn't form words, could only listen as a government agent leaned over him and asked,
How much does he remember? Can we adjust that?
Days bled into hallucinatory flashes. His wife, Sarah, appeared like a ghost beside his bed, her face hollow with exhaustion.
They won't let me take you home,
she whispered, glancing nervously at the door.
They keep saying you're a flight risk. Luke, what did you see out there?
He surfaced fully to a nurse asking if he knew today's date. He didn't even know the year. The rehabilitation facility felt more like a prison. Locked doors, supervised phone calls, psychological evaluations that always circled back to the same questions about his episode in the woods. Paperwork invented crimes faster than he could heal. Then something ran Sarah's car into a ditch on a straight, dry road. No skid marks, no explanation. That's when the agent finally came with his offer. The man slid a folder stamped with the "no" glyph across the table, payment for the land. Sarah looked at the folder, then at Luke, her face pale but determined.
Some things are bigger than property rights,
she said quietly.
Our children's safety is one of them.
As she screamed into the phone, a massive pitch-black wolf with glowing red eyes stepped out of the shadows, the leader. He knew then they had to leave, moving his family to Maryland. The war followed. He took a job with a wildlife agency, a position he suspected was for monitoring him. Strange reports filtered in, campers finding massive claw marks gouged into park signs, deep furrows that looked like they'd been carved by railroad spikes. The climax came while he was at work. His father took the children to a state park. He saw something, sent the children running, and they heard gunshots. His father stumbled out, torn to shreds. The next day, the hospital called. His father had died. Consumed by a grief so profound it turned to pure rage, Luke left on a revenge mission. It was a trap. The pack surrounded him. Then 2 creatures emerged, carrying the body of a small juvenile. The leader pointed at Luke, at the dead juvenile, and at itself. An eye for an eye. His father had killed their child. Luke closed his eyes, accepting his fate. When he opened them, they were walking away. All but one. A final wolf gutted him with its claws. As he lay bleeding, something clicked into place. The wolves' gesture of carrying their dead child, the way they'd pointed at him, the ancient mercy. He remembered the old booklet Barnabas had found, the third hunt, where a tall one spared a respectful boy. He remembered Big Red's tree symbol, wolf, man, and giant prince marking boundaries of understanding. He was living the final cycle of the ancient feud, where respect for grief transcended the call for blood. His wife called with impossible news his father was alive. Sarah met him at the hospital, her face a map of sleepless nights and worry lines that hadn't been there a month ago.
Luke, we need to talk.
She said, pulling him aside before he could enter his father's room.
The kids are having nightmares. Every night, they keep drawing pictures of wolves standing in our backyard.
She showed him a crayon drawing from their 5-year-old, stick figures of a family inside a house, with dark shapes surrounding it. But when Luke looked closer, the details chilled him. The wolves weren't just dark scribbles. Each one had carefully drawn amber eyes, too perfectly round and knowing for a child's art. Their mouths were open, revealing rows of pointed teeth rendered in white crayon over the black. Most disturbing of all, the child had drawn what looked like human hands at the ends of the wolves' front legs, each finger meticulously outlined.
They've never seen wolves, Luke.
Sarah continued, her voice cracking.
How do they know to draw them standing upright? How do they know to give them those eyes?
She pulled out another drawing, this one showing a wolf figure standing in their Maryland backyard, one clawed hand pressed against their sliding glass door. The crayon marks were heavy, as if the child had pressed hard with fear while drawing.
Whatever this is, it's not over. It's following us. Following our family.
She gripped his arm.
I need you to promise me that when this ends, however it ends, we're done. No more revenge. No more going back to those woods. I can't lose you to whatever took your grandfather and almost took your father.
Luke looked at the drawing again, at the careful way his child had drawn the wolf's eyes, too knowing, too aware.
I promise,
he said, meaning it. But they both knew some promises were harder to keep than others. The doctors had been ready to call it, but he had stabilized against all odds. With his last strength, Luke called 911. His father, released 6 weeks later, explained.
There's no other animal on the planet that has the same eyes as them,
he said. He had seen the creature's eyes, knew what it was, and shot it. Its parent then emerged, its face a mask of both pure rage and profound sadness, and swiped at him with a single devastating blow. The pack had seen his grief. They had recognized something in his tears that transcended the call for blood. The Mississippi property is gone, demolished. In Maryland, a fragile peace has been made. Recently, he saw one of the wolves from the park. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance there was no aggression, only a quiet, somber understanding. Neither moved, neither threatened. The silence stretched until the wolf turned and disappeared into the trees. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Luke wonders if Big Red had a hand in brokering that truce, if the old alliances between the giants and the wolf people still held sway when mercy was needed most. 5 years after the truce, Luke returned alone to Mississippi. The government had released their claim on the land after what they termed environmental stabilization. The old farmhouse was gone, bulldozed to its foundation, but the woods remained. At dusk, deep in the timber where he'd once shared fish by firelight, he found what he was looking for. A fresh carving on a sycamore, wolf, man, and giant prince arranged in a triangle. Big Red's mark, but evolved. The lines were deeper now, more deliberate. Below it, carved with the same massive claws, were marks Luke eventually realized were numbers. The years of birth and death for every Lockett who had died in the war. His great-grandfather. His grandfather. Even a mark for himself, but with no death date. Luke sensed a massive presence in the trees. The scent of wet cedar and bile drifted on the evening air, stronger than memory. He heard the soft sound of enormous feet shifting on forest floor, a careful breath that could have been relief, like a burden finally set down.
I know you're there.
Luke said quietly to the darkness.
I came to say thank you.
A long silence, then a deep rumble that might have been acknowledgement. Below the carving, Luke scratched his own message with a broken piece of flint. Peace while breath endures. When he looked up again, he was alone. But somehow, for the first time in generations, the woods felt truly quiet. But the scars remain, and the sightings continue. On September 24, 2024, a man walking his dog near County Road 431 caught a photo of a dogman he claimed was 9 to 10 feet tall, stalking through the same Mississippi woods where it all began. And carved into what's left of the old barn door, a warning remains for all those who venture into the wild. If it don't feel right, get the hell out of there. These stories remind us that shadow has long paced the Chickasaw Hills. If you carry a tale of your own, send it to deadnetstudios@gmail.com. From all of us at Deadnet Studios, Yakoki, thank you for walking the night road with us. Nana Chokma, Ninaka Chokma, until we meet again, may your dreams be good. Good night.
In the shadows of the digital night, we've wandered far and seen some sights, from haunting tales to eerie lights. Deadnet Studios where fear ignites. So long, farewell from the crimson hollows. We'll be back again with more tales to follow. Keep the lights dimmed and your curiosity high. For in Deadnet's realm, the spirits never die. We've danced with ghosts, chased legends on, through cryptid codes, stories untold. In cyberspace where mysteries unfold, our journey's been daring, brave and bold. So long, farewell from the darkened halls, where shadows whisper and the unknown calls. Keep your eyes wide and your mind astir, for the mysteries of Deadnet are a haunting blur. In the world of strange and the unexplained, we find our stories wildly untamed. With the studio's end, we take a little rest. They find the shadows every day.